You know, I think most people find a strange sort of comfort in a little bit of chaos. A messy desk means a creative mind, a cluttered kitchen is the sign of a home filled with love, that sort of thing. I'm not like that. I find my comfort, my sanity, in order. My apartment is a testament to this. You could eat off the floors, but you'd never get the chance because I'd wipe them down before you could even think about it. Everything has a place. The books on my shelves are organized not just by author, but by publication date and then color-coded. The spice rack in my kitchen is alphabetized. It's not about being clean, it's about being correct. It's about control. My job is an extension of that. I'm a digital archivist for the city's historical society. It sounds boring, and honestly, a lot of it is. But there's a deep, profound satisfaction in it for me. I take the messy, chaotic, often illegible remnants of the past, old letters, faded photographs, brittle journals, and I bring them into the digital world. I scan them, tag them, cross-reference them. I build a perfect, searchable, logical database from the clutter of human lives. It's a world I can manage, where every piece of information has a verifiable source and a designated slot. The real world isn't like that. The real world is full of variables, of people who don't follow the rules, and that's why I keep my distance. It wasn't always this way. I wasn't born with a label maker in my hand and a desperate need for everything to be just so. I was a normal kid once, happy even. But all of that changed one hot, sticky summer afternoon when I was 6 years old. My mom had taken me to the county fair. It was a kaleidoscope of overwhelming sensations. The sweet, cloying smell of spun sugar, the greasy aroma of fried dough, the chaotic symphony of carnival music, screaming teenagers on the tilt-a-whirl, and the incessant dinging of arcade games. It was magical and terrifying all at once. The one constant, the one anchor in that dizzying sea of stimuli was my mother's hand. Her hand was my whole world. It was warm and soft, the grip firm but gentle. As long as I was holding that hand, I was safe. We were walking past a balloon vendor, a cheerful man surrounded by a bobbing, vibrant cloud of Mylar characters. I pointed at a shiny blue dog, my eyes wide with wonder. For just a second, a single catastrophic second, I let go of her hand to point with both of mine. When I turned back, she was gone. The crowd, which had just been a colorful backdrop, suddenly transformed into a suffocating forest of legs and torsos. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced my chest. I called for her, but my small voice was swallowed by the fair's cacophony. And then I saw her, a flash of her red summer dress through the crowd. Relief washed over me so intensely it made my knees weak. I pushed my way through the throng of people, my little legs pumping as fast as they could. "Mommy!" I cried out, reaching for the red dress. The woman turned around, and my world shattered. It wasn't her. The face was all wrong. Sharp where my mother's was soft, the eyes a cold, indifferent blue. A stranger. I backed away, the panic returning with a vengeance. This happened 3 more times. Each time, I'd spot a detail I knew. My mother's dark, wavy hair, the white sandals she was wearing, the familiar shape of her shoulders. Each time, a surge of desperate hope would carry me forward. And each time, a stranger's face would turn to look down at me, sometimes with annoyance, sometimes with pity, but never with the recognition and love I so desperately needed. That day, I didn't just get lost. I learned a terrible, fundamental lesson. The things you trust the most, the faces you know better than your own, can betray you. They can be wrong. The world was not a safe, ordered place. It was a terrifying masquerade, and you never know what was hiding behind a familiar mask. This fear became the architect of my life. My meticulous routines, my sterile apartment, my career spent corralling unruly data, it's all a defense mechanism. It's my desperate, lifelong attempt to ensure that nothing is ever out of place again, that no familiar detail ever turns out to be a lie. Which is why my latest project at the archive has been so deeply unsettling. I was tasked with digitizing a collection of artifacts from a defunct offshoot of the Historical Society, a group that had delved into local folklore and occultism in the late 1800s. Most of it was nonsense: dowsing rods, pressings of fairy circles, and other such paraphernalia. But then I found the journals of a man named Silas Croft. His early entries were mundane, but his later writings grew erratic, paranoid. He wrote about a secret society within his own community, a group that called itself the Congregation of the Shared Form. They were obsessed with shedding their singular temporary vessels to achieve a sort of collective immortality. Silas wrote that they had found a ritual, an ancient and unholy thing that would allow them to become one. But something went wrong. He didn't write about a spiritual joining, he wrote about a physical one. He described seeing his friends, his neighbors, even his own wife, and knowing, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they weren't them anymore. "She has Mary's face," he wrote one night, "but her eyes are still pools. Her smile does not warm the room. It is a skin she is wearing, a costume of flesh." The phrase that stuck with me, the one that I couldn't shake, was his description of their voices. He said they sounded almost right, but if you listened closely, you could hear a hollow echo, like a second voice speaking from a great and terrible depth. I tried to dismiss it all as the ravings of a disturbed man, a product of 19th century superstition, but I couldn't. Silas Croft, in his elegant, looping script, had given a name and a voice to the very horror that had haunted me since I was a 6-year-old girl lost at a county fair. The fear of the familiar face being nothing but a mask for something horribly dreadful. Last night, I stayed late at the archive, determined to finish Silas's final journal. The building, a grand old Carnegie library, is eerie after hours. The daytime hustle of researchers and genealogists is replaced by a profound, tomb-like silence, broken only by the low, steady hum of the server racks in the climate-controlled rooms. The air smells of old paper, leather, and dust, the smell of ghosts. I was in my small, windowless office in the sub-basement, the only light coming from my dusk lamp and the glow of the high-resolution scanner. Silas's final entries were almost illegible, his hand shaking so violently that the pen had torn through the fragile paper in places. He wrote of a confrontation, of being cornered by the things that wore the faces of his family. He wrote about one of them touching him, a cold that was not of this world, spreading from the point of contact up his arm. The last entry, scrawled diagonally across the page, was not even a sentence. It was just 4 words, a frantic final testament. "My skin, not yours." A shiver traced its way down my spine. As I scanned that final, terrifying page, the lights in my office flickered once, twice, and then died. The hum of the servers cut out, plunging the entire sub-basement into absolute darkness, and a silence so deep it rang in my ears. For a moment, I just sat there, my heart hammering against my ribs. A power outage, that's all it was. A blown transformer, probably. My logical, ordered mind supplied a dozen rational explanations. But my other mind, the part that still remembered the terror of being lost and alone, wasn't listening. The darkness in the archive didn't feel empty. It felt heavy. It felt occupied. I fumbled for my phone, my shaky thumb finding the flashlight function. A bright, narrow beam cut through the oppressive black. I packed my bag with methodical slowness, my hands moving on autopilot while my senses were on high alert. Every creak of the old building, every drip from an ancient pipe sounded like a footstep. It was time to go. The path out of the sub-basement was a long, straight hallway lined with towering metal shelves, a canyon of forgotten history. The emergency exit sign at the far end cast a sickly, greenish glow that didn't illuminate so much as it deepened the shadows. My phone's flashlight beam danced ahead of me, catching swirling dust motes that looked like agitated spirits. Halfway down the hall, I heard it, a soft, wet, shuffling sound. It came from somewhere deep within the stacks to my left. I stopped dead, every muscle in my body tensing. It had to be Frank, the night security guard, doing his rounds. He was an old man, and his gait was a slow, shuffling one. "Frank?" I called out, my voice sounding thin and reedy in the vast silence. No answer. The shuffling continued, a steady, rhythmic scuffing. It sounded like someone dragging their feet, but there was a wetness to it, a sticky, unpleasant quality that made the hairs on my arms stand up. The sound was getting closer. I forced myself to move forward, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. As I reached the end of an aisle, I peered into the darkness, and I saw him, a figure standing at the other end of the narrow corridor between the shelves. It was Mr. Abernathy, the head archivist, a kind, grandfatherly man who had gone home promptly at 5 o'clock, just like he did every single day. He was standing with his back to me, his shoulders hunched. A profound sense of wrongness washed over me. "Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "What are you doing here? The power's out." He didn't move. He just stood there, shuffling his feet, with that same wet, rhythmic sound. It was the sound of shoes on a floor slick with something. A knot of pure dread tightened in my gut. This wasn't right. Nothing about this was right. I took a hesitant step into the aisle, my flashlight beam trembling. "Are you okay?" He began to turn. The movement was agonizingly slow, jerky and unnatural, like a puppet being moved by an unskilled master. The green glow from the exit sign caught the side of his face, and I saw that his skin, normally ruddy and weathered, had a pale, waxy sheen, like a cheap candle. My light found his face just as he completed the turn. My breath caught in my throat. It was him. It was Mr. Abernathy's face. His tweed jacket with the worn leather elbow patches, his kind, wrinkled eyes. But it was all wrong. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and utterly vacant. They were like glass doll's eyes, reflecting the beam of my flashlight without a flicker of life. And his smile? It was stretched too wide, a grotesque fixed rictus that pulled the corners of his mouth almost to his ears. It was a perfect copy, a meticulous forgery of a human, but it was hollow. It was the face from my nightmares, the stranger in my mother's dress, the skin that is not skin from Silas Croft's journal. It took a single, shuffling step toward me. As it moved, I heard it, a faint, terrible whisper of static, a ghost of a sound that seemed to follow it. And then it spoke, my name, Elara. The voice was Mr. Abernathy's, but it wasn't. Layered beneath his familiar, gentle tone was another one, a deeper, rasping resonance, a horrifying harmony from some impossible throat. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My lungs were frozen, seized by a terror so pure and so absolute that it transcended sound. It was the 6-year-old girl in me that was in control now, paralyzed by the ultimate nightmare made real. My fingers went numb, and my phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the concrete floor. The beam of light spun wildly across the shelves, and then settled, pointing away from us, leaving the aisle in the dim green twilight of the exit sign. I was alone in the dark with the thing that wore my boss's face, and it was still smiling, that terrible wide smile, as it took another slow, wet, shuffling step toward me. The paralysis lasted only a second, but then a more primal instinct took over, a jolt of pure adrenaline that bypassed every rational thought in my head. I scrambled backward, my hands scraping against the rough concrete. My foot kicked the fallen phone, sending the beam of light skittering across the floor to cast a demonic uplighting on the approaching figure. For a horrifying instant, I saw its jaw unhinge, stretching far beyond the capacity of a human skull, and a thick, gelatinous substance dripped from the impossibly wide smile onto the dusty floor. That was it. That was the sight that broke the spell. I turned and ran. I didn't think, I just moved, my sensible office shoes slipping and sliding on the concrete. The shuffling sound behind me changed. It became a frantic, wet slapping, the sound of bare, slick feet hitting the ground with sickening speed. It was faster than it looked, so much faster. I threw myself at the emergency exit at the end of the hall, my hands fumbling for the push bar. The slapping was right behind me, so close I could feel a cold draft on the back of my neck. I slammed my shoulder into the bar. It didn't budge. Panic, hot and acidic, flooded my throat. I hit it again with a desperate, guttural sob, and this time the lock gave way with a deafening crack. I tumbled out into a narrow, rain-slicked alleyway, landing hard on the wet pavement. The cool night air and the sting of the rain on my face were a shocking, welcome reality. I scrambled to my feet, turning back to look at the doorway, expecting the thing to be right there. But the doorway was empty. The sound had stopped. It was gone. I stood there for a long time, chest heaving, rain plastering my hair to my face, staring into the oppressive darkness of the archive, my heart pounding out a rhythm of pure, unadulterated terror. I don't remember driving home. I must have, because I found myself standing in my living room, my keys still clutched in my white-knuckled hand, my clothes soaked through. My apartment, my sanctuary of order and control, felt different. The precise arrangement of furniture, the perfectly aligned books, it all felt fragile, a flimsy stage set that could be torn down at any moment. I locked the door, bolted it, and slid the chain across. For an hour, I just stood there, shaking. My mind, my greatest asset, was failing me. It was a hallucination, stress, lack of sleep. I was working too hard, spending too much time with those creepy old journals. I repeated these rationalizations like a mantra, but they were hollow. The waxy sheen of that skin, the unhinged jaw, the wet, slapping sound of its pursuit, those images were burned into my memory. I spent the rest of the night in a state of high alert, jumping at every creak of the building. In the morning, I forced myself into a semblance of my routine. I checked the archive's network status from my laptop. Everything was online. No power outage had been logged. I checked the security guard's report. Frank had done his rounds, noting nothing unusual. With a trembling hand, I composed a carefully worded email to Mr. Abernathy's personal account. "Hi, Mr. Abernathy. Hope you had a good evening. Just wanted to double-check the server reboot schedule for tomorrow." The reply came back in less than 5 minutes. "All good, Elara. See you in the morning. Best, Arthur." The sheer normality of it was perhaps the most terrifying thing of all. It meant I was alone in this. It meant I was losing my mind, or something much, much worse. The day was a blur of feigned normalcy and barely suppressed panic. Every face I saw on the street seemed to hold a hint of that same vacuity. Every smile looked a little too wide. The world had become a gallery of potential masks. That evening, just as the sun was setting, casting long, distorted shadows across my living room, my phone rang. It was my mom. A wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees, washed over me. Her voice, her real voice, was the one thing that could anchor me. "Hi, sweetie," she said. But something was off. There was a faint, tinny quality to her voice, a subtle echo that made it sound like she was speaking from the bottom of a well. "I know this is totally out of the blue, but I was in the neighborhood visiting a friend, and I was just thinking of you. Can I pop by for a bit? Maybe we can have some dinner." My rules, my carefully constructed walls, came crumbling down. A visit from my mom was a violation of a dozen of my unspoken protocols about impromptu events, but I was so desperate for a familiar, comforting presence that I didn't care. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Of course, Mom. Come over." An hour later, my doorbell rang. But when I opened a door, she wasn't on the doorstep. She was standing in my hallway, right outside my living room, as if she had been waiting there the whole time. "The door was unlocked, sweetie," she said, and she smiled. It was my mother's smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. They were still and placid, reflecting the lamplight with a dead, glassy quality. The sweet, cloying smell of lilies, a flower I knew for a fact she despised, filled the apartment. A cold dread, colder than the alleyway rain, began to creep up my spine. We sat at my small, perfectly set dining table. I had made pasta, her favorite. She didn't touch it. She just sat there, her hands folded neatly on the table, her fingernails making a faint, rhythmic clicking sound on the polished wood. She talked about her day, about the friends she had visited, but the details were vague, the jokes hollow. Every comment was just slightly off-key, a discordant note in the symphony of the person I knew better than anyone. It was the longest dinner of my life. My mind was screaming, every fiber of my being telling me to run. This was not my mother. This was the stranger from the fair, the thing from the archive, wearing my mother's face as its newest, most perfect costume. With a shaking hand, I excused myself to the bathroom. I locked the door and pulled out my phone. My heart hammered against my ribs as I dialed my father's number. He picked up on the second ring. "Hey, kiddo," he said, his voice warm and real. "What's up?" I kept my own voice to a whisper. "Dad, is Mom with you?" There was a pause. "No, she's not. She's out of town, remember? Visiting her sister in Northwood. She won't be back until Sunday." "Why? Is everything okay? You sound strange." The floor dropped out from under me. I have to go, Dad. I'll call you back." I hung up before he could reply. A deep, primal terror, worse than anything I had ever felt, seized me. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, and unlocked the bathroom door. She was standing right there, on the other side, her face inches from mine. The smile was gone. Her expression was utterly blank, her head tilted at a slight, unnatural angle. "Who were you talking to, Elara?" she asked. The voice was still my mother's, but the echo was louder now, a dissonant, rasping undertone that vibrated in the air between us. Before I could answer, her form began to flicker like a bad television signal. The illusion of my mother wavered, and for a split second, I saw Mr. Abernathy's face, his eyes wide and dead. Then another face, a woman I didn't recognize, her mouth open in a silent scream. And then, with a sound like 1,000 ligaments snapping at once, the disguise fell away completely. The thing that stood before me was a pulsating, shifting mound of raw flesh and sinew, a nightmare tapestry of stolen parts. I could see faces trapped within the churning mass, eyes blinking out of sequence, mouths stretching in silent agony, all woven into a single, cohesive, monstrous body. A chorus of whispers emanated from it, the stolly voices of its victims all speaking at once. And from the center of the pulsating horror, my mother's face, pale and waxy, stared at me with those dead glass eyes. It lunged. I threw myself backward into the living room, a scream finally tearing itself from my raw throat. It was a sound of pure animal terror. The creature scrambled after me, its mismatched limbs propelling its grotesque bulk forward with an unnatural skittering speed. It moved with a wet, slapping sound that echoed my flight from the archive. My apartment, my fortress of order, became a chaotic battlefield. I grabbed a heavy, minimalist floor lamp and swung it like a baseball bat. It connected with the creature's side with a sickening, fleshy thud. The thing barely seemed to notice. A pseudopod of flesh lashed out, wrapping around the lamp and wrenching it from my hands with impossible strength. It threw the lamp across the room, where it shattered against my perfectly organized bookshelf. My life's work, my color-coded history, rained down in a chaotic mess of paper. I scrambled for the kitchen, my mind racing. Light. Silas Croft wrote that it was repulsed by light. My kitchen had a strip of powerful halogen lights above the counter. I fumbled for the switch, my fingers slipping on the smooth plastic. The creature was in the doorway, its form contracting and expanding, the faces within it twisting. I finally flipped the switch. A brilliant, sterile white light flooded the kitchen. The creature recoiled with a wet, sizzling hiss, the chorus of voices rising to a pained shriek. The flesh on its forward-facing side seemed to bubble and melt like wax held to a flame. It retreated into the shadows of the living room, its form momentarily destabilized. It was my only chance. But as I backed away, my eyes locked on the face of my mother, still visible in the roiling mess. A memory, sharp and pure, flashed in my mind. A sun-drenched afternoon in our backyard, my mother pushing me on the swing, her laughter ringing in the air, the scent of her rose perfume, the genuine warmth in her eyes. "I love you, sweetie," she had said. That memory, that pure, genuine emotion, was a weapon. I focused on it, holding it in my mind like a shield. The creature convulsed. The form of my mother began to dissolve, to pull away from the main mass, its features contorting in what looked like agony. It was working. The connection to my love, my real love for my mother, was tearing it apart. But then another memory surfaced, unbidden, a darker one. The hot, sticky air of the county fair, the terror of being alone, the cold, indifferent face of the stranger in the red dress, the crushing weight of that betrayal, the seed of the fear that had defined my entire life. My concentration shattered. The good memory was washed away by the tidal wave of my core trauma. The creature sensed my weakness. It surged forward, no longer repulsed by the light, its form solidifying again. The face of my mother receded back into the mass, replaced by the face of the stranger from the fair, her lips pulled back in that same terrible, wide smile. The terror of that moment, the root of all my fear, was now its fuel. It cornered me against the counter, my alphabetized spice rack crashing to the floor, filling the air with the smells of paprika and cumin, a bizarre, mundane scent in the face of abject horror. I had no way left to run. It reached for me, not with a hand, but with a tendril of raw, twitching sinew. It touched my arm. A coldness like I had never imagined, a cold that felt like the death of stars, shot through my body, paralyzing me from the inside out. I looked down and... The world is a very tidy place, if you know how to look at it. Everything has a place, a purpose, a perfect, searchable, logical database built from the clutter of human lives. There is a deep, profound satisfaction in it, in taking the chaotic, messy remnants and giving them order. My apartment is a testament to this. It is clean, it is correct, it is in control. Sometimes my father calls. The phone rings and rings, a shrill, disorderly sound that I do not answer. Sometimes he leaves messages, his voice full of a messy, pointless emotion that I no longer understand. He speaks of a daughter who was lost, a girl who built walls to keep the world out. He doesn't understand that the walls were not to keep the world out, they were to keep the order in. He doesn't understand that I am no longer lost. I have found my place. I have found my purpose. I am part of a greater whole now, a collective consciousness, a shared form. We are all here together. Mr. Abernathy, the woman with the screaming mouth, even the man Silas, whose words brought me here. We are all in our correct, designated slots. The little girl at the fair was so afraid of the stranger's face. She didn't realize that being a stranger is not the horror. The horror is being alone. And I am not alone anymore. Not ever again.
Thank you so much for watching or listening. Like and subscribe for more nightmares. Your support keeps the darkness from consuming this channel, so we can face the next terrifying story together. Don't be left in the dark.